So hi everybody, we've waited 2 minutes and more after the start time, so we're going to start now. Thanks to everybody to have joined us today. As I was saying, the number of people is quite reduced, so you will be able to ask questions, and you have the possibility to raise your hands after each of the demos that will be performing. And we'll try to keep it short so that we can move on to the next demo. Okay? But don't hesitate. So let me start very quickly with okay, I didn't decide the picture, my graphic designer decided, so it's a bit weird, but that's me, Walid Eljaafari. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Algonomia. It's a French startup that develops global solutions for tax departments. I have a multidisciplinary profile. I studied engineering, and I also studied a lot of math and a lot of law. And so I ended up in the tax teams of Deloitte in France, and then moved to the teams of PwC in France, in the transfer pricing teams. In PwC, I noticed that a law firm is not the best place to invest in R&D and to develop code. So with the team I had built over there, we decided to found Algonomia and actually develop software. Welcome, you can come. I'm going to start by explaining a bit where we are at Algonomia. It's been now 7 years that we operate. We are working with clients from size that range from 800 million euro revenue, so slightly above, don't worry. And that started the threshold of the OECD for Pillar 2 and for the CBCR, up to 85 billion euros, some of the biggest groups in France. We hope to go with even bigger clients if possible, but right now these are the clients we have. You can see some of the names, Alstom, Engie, Renault, Schneider Electric. A lot of them are in France because we started in France, but we are also growing our client base outside of France. The diversity that we have in our client is also huge because the size that they have go from 20 entities to more than 4,000 entities that need to be managed in the consolidation scope. And it is used worldwide in more than 160 jurisdictions by a big variety of profiles. You have tax specialists, tax managers, you have accountants, you have CFOs, so a lot of profiles are collaborating on our solution in all of these groups and are contributing to collect data for the tax function. We have also worked with distribution partners in France, most notably Deloitte. We have also worked with FIDAL in order to produce some studies and to implement some projects. We have also worked with education partners. You know some of them, like the Wirtschaft University in Wien, where we have delivered some conferences on digitalization, of course, and also in France, EDEC, it's a business school, and EDAC, it's a law school, where we have provided some seminars on the approach, the digital approach to law, because this is something that students need to be educated to. The motto that we have is that we want to make tax departments autonomous in the use of technology. We believe that by creating the right algorithms and embedding them in the solutions with the right UX design, it is possible to give back the control to tax departments. Basically, they should be in control of tax modeling, of computing the impact of this or that reorganization in the group with regard to tax. And right now, they are not able to do that. And so this is our mission, put them back in control. In order to achieve this goal, we have built a solution that is built on 2 pillars. It's a weird joke to do in this time, but it's the way it is. On one side, we have a data collection platform that can also align with a workflow manager. What does it mean? You can send tasks to the different users in your group for them to collect data for you. And if you have the chance to be able to connect to an ERP or a data source, you can also ask them to review or treat this data to then be used in the different processes that you want to automate. On the right side of the screen, you can also see the different use cases that we can treat. We're going to go into a bit more details. These use cases range from transfer pricing. You can see automation, computing the prices, computing the adjustments, computing also the tax impacts of these of the TP policy and of changes in the TP policy. And on the other side, you also have the documentation. As soon as you have a lot of data on your TP policy and on your TP flows in a platform, you want to be able to use them to produce the TP documentation in a coherent way. And so that's what we do with our clients. Then you also have a set of solutions dedicated to all the BEPS issues, namely the CBCR, we've been doing that since 2017, and also, of course, Pillar 2 now, where we are one of the solutions that is able to perform the end-to-end computation and prepare the global information return. And that's a little bit more less legal, if you want, and a little bit more internal reporting. We're also working a lot on tax accounting, tax footprint analysis, and also the management of different taxes and the effective tax rate for the different reports that the finance department will require from the tax departments. The purpose of the presentation today is not to pitch every single app and try to sell it to you. No, the purpose of the presentation is to do some kind of deep dive into the technological components that power each of the use cases, because these are technological components that we believe need to become a standard in each tax department. And so we're going to talk about our tax simulation engine. What does it do? What should it be able to do? And this is when it's interesting for you to ask questions, because maybe we have missed some elements or you want us to go further. And this is very something that is new and that we need to develop further in the future. Of course, we're going to talk about Pillar 2. We're going to show both the computation and the XML department. So I'm going to start. Don't hesitate to interrupt me, but I would prefer the questions to come after I've done the demo. This way, it's a bit easier to sequence the discussion. So now let's talk about transfer pricing. As I have said before, a lot is being done in tax departments with regard to TP compliance. The first component is the documentation. If you want all the compliance issues, gathering the transaction metrics, having a TP calendar, having the ability to get to produce the master file and the local file with the lowest possible effort, not always automation. Sometimes automation is not the right solution, especially for an entity that does so many things at the same time. Maybe it's not perfect, but when you have 100 entities that have the same profile, then maybe you should completely automate. So there are decisions to be made. There's also some countries that require simplified TP filings. It's the case in France, it's the case in Belgium, and these can be automated. So as soon as you have the transaction metrics. And you also have the question of intercompany contracts and the management of agreement procedures. All of these can be managed centrally. There exists a lot of solutions to do that. But the question is, how do you manage everything at the same time? And then on the other side, you have everything that is a bit more linked to the computations, if you want. And a lot of things exist too. If you have a well-structured ERP or consolidation tool, you may already be able to segment your P&L automatically or have gathered the data already segmented. You also may be able to compute your TP prices directly and your TP adjustments at the end of the year. There are solutions that exist in the market to do that. But the future of TP technologies is to not only automate, but also give access to simulation and modeling. What happens if I change the organization of my TP flows? What happens if the tax systems where I am implanted change, and how does it affect and impact my effective tax rate? And so part of the demonstration we're going to do now is to assess the feasibility of building such a solution that allows you to assess the impact on your effective tax rate of changes in your TP policy. So how would we go, oh, sorry, another slide first. We have done a lot of these things with different clients. Schneider Electric, we've worked on TP adjustment and TP computations in their entire perimeter. NG, we've worked on the transaction matrix to prepare documentations and to prepare also the simplified documentations. And in another French CAC 40 group that I cannot name, we've worked on automating the TP adjustments so that they can prepare, using the results of our work, all of the journal entries that they need to pass to account for the TP adjustments every month. So now, how would we do these modeling? The way that we have worked at Algonomia is to really think in terms of systems and not think in terms of law, if you want. So the way that we need to systematize this problem is by distinguishing the different objects that we need to work with for the performation of this modeling. So the first step is to identify in a very simple setup with a very simple flow that we have two counterpart entities that have their own financial data, financial accounts and financial information, and other data that may be relevant depending on the type of transfer prices. It can be quantities, it can be number of hours, if it's a management fees, it can be different types of data that you need. And on the other side, you have another entity that will be either the one billing or the one paying for the transaction. And again, you need the same type of information on both sides. Each of these entities, they are located for transfer pricing purposes in two different jurisdictions. So you need to have information on these two jurisdictions and a way to model the way that these tax systems will transform in terms of impact on the tax level, depending on the way the KPIs of each entity will change if you change the transfer prices. For example, if you increase the profit in one entity, you want to know what will be the impact. Same thing, you want to know what it will impact if you diminish it. But then you have more complicated elements to manage. You will have also the different taxes aspects. If you have losses, how do you carry them forward? Do you use them, and so on? And so all of this also needs to be modeled if you want to have a very precise management of the effective tax rate. And then you also have rules that apply to the transaction itself. The rules of the pricing that you have defined in your TP policy, but also sometimes specific rules on the category of transactions, depending on the bilateral relationship between the two states. And you may have withholding taxes rules, you may have the ability to use them as tax credits in one jurisdiction and not the other, and so on. And this also needs to be modeled if you want to have an accurate tax impact of changes on this specific transaction. So that's a lot of things to model in order to just compute the impact of one single transaction. Now, you need to imagine in a group that has 4,000 entities and hundreds of thousands of transfer pricing flows, how would we be able to compute in real time the changes that would happen if you perform a TP adjustment or if you reorganize the TP flows? And so that's the purpose of the solution that we're building in our company. So now I'm gonna move into a demo. Of course, it's not gonna be real client data, sadly, but we will show sample cases. So let me start from something new. So I'm gonna show to you right now our demo platform. It is set up with use cases that are completely fake. So sometimes the data is not completely coherent. Don't hesitate to point that out after in the questions if something doesn't make much sense. Okay, sorry. It's a bit annoying. So the way our solution is organized is really simple if you want. You have the main functionalities that I have described, the management of tasks and processes, the management of data collection, and finally the management of the documents that you can ask your users to provide during the data collection process. For example, if you have memos or descriptions or attached documents, you can also gather them. So now let's enter the transfer pricing solution that we have. Its name is ITP Leaf. So here I'm entering, and we are going to focus on not the before and after French tax hikes. I wanted to model that, but the problem is that it's a bit of a mess now in France, so it's hard to know what I'm supposed to model. We're going to focus on these two scenarios here with 3 principles and a single principle. So the initial model is the model with 3 principles, and so the purpose was to showcase what would happen if instead of having a principle for my transfer pricing transactions located in 3 jurisdictions. In this example, it's France, Italy, and Poland. What happens if I relocate all of the principle for each type of transaction in the Netherlands? So that's the example I'm going to have. And so in this case, all of the entities that are in business unit 1, according to the transfer pricing rules that I've set up in my model, for the business unit 1, it's going to be the entity in Poland. For the business unit 2, it's going to be in France. And for the business unit 3, it's going to be Italy too. Okay? And so here I've gathered the different information, so a simplified P&L segmented per business unit for each entities. And I also have gathered the tax information. Now if I go back, you will see here I have what I call a rule file. A rule file is a file that describes the TP policy and the tax systems that I want to model. And so in this case, I have defined very simple jurisdiction rules with national tax rates. I've been told in a previous demo that in Poland it's not 40%, so again, the data are completely fake. And I can also model different other elements that I'm interested to. The other rules that I've set up are more linked to the transfer pricing policies, and as you can see here, for business unit 1, well, you're going to have a return on sales towards the entity in Poland, and return on COGS for the business unit 2 for targeting France 1, and a royalty based on the sales for Italy 2. And so if I run the computation, I will have the result that tells me, okay, you will have this impact in terms of TP adjustment at the end of the year, and you can see that first you recognize the counterpart, and you also have the computation of, well, you identify the TP method, of course, and you also have the actual application of the rule, the reasoning behind it, and you can also showcase the PBT after the adjustment and the adjustment amounts for each of the entities. You also have the tax impact of this adjustment. You also see here that there are columns that are empty. These columns are dedicated to another component. It's called what we call the optimization. In this scenario, you want to have the ability to see what would happen if you would change your positioning in each of your benchmark and see how you would optimize your cash tax, your effective tax rate, or any other variable that you prefer. And because it can change and not be as simple as put everything in the low tax jurisdictions if you have different taxes that you want to consume and this type of element. And basically when you hit the button optimize, what it will do, it will tell you, okay, for this type of transaction, my benchmark tells me I can be in this range, and I can propose these optimized values for each of the elements in the range. Okay? So here we can go into more detail if you want, but that's a bit technical in order to explain the algorithm. But what it does, once you launch it, it will run the optimization, and it will present the result as what would happen if you would apply these margin rates within these benchmarks, and you would see what would be your effective tax rate at the end. Okay? What is very interesting with our solution during the time that it loads is that you can also run some comparison models. Okay? You have the ability, it's in this screen that I've prepared it, to compare two scenarios. In this case, instead of having only the three principles, I have targeted everything towards the Netherlands, and I've put a very small tax rate as an example in the Netherlands. And so what you can see in this example is that the group effective tax rate is always the same at the beginning. Of course, it's the same data. And if you perform the adjustments so that it puts you back at in accordance with your TP policy, your effective tax rate increases when you target France, Poland, in my example, and Italy, but it goes down a lot if you go to the Netherlands, where I had put an effective tax rate of 10. And you can, of course, drill down and understand how the effective tax rate changes before and after in the two scenarios. And so what you can see here is that you can put the two scenarios against each other. And in order to do that, you don't need to change everything. You don't need to gather the data from the ERP system. You just need to do another rule file and apply it to your data. The rule file where I had defined the TP policy. And finally, I was talking about the demo part. So in the demo part 1, of course, initially it was at 19%. And so if we start at 10.82, by finding the right positioning in the benchmarks, the algorithm was able to propose positioning in the benchmarks that was able to diminish the effective tax rate up down to 8.2%. Of course, this is not something that you can do like that every year. It's not something that you can propose as an optimization strategy to your clients. However, when you are working in order to design your TP policy or reorganize your TP flows for the incoming years, and you're working on the benchmarks that you have, this will allow you to know how to most effectively organize your TP policy for the next incoming years. Do you have questions at this stage for the TP modeling? Yes?
I have a quick question. To run your algorithm, how do you calculate the relevance score or ranking?
What do you mean by ranking?
Yeah, I mean like ranking to make sure the relevance score is like, because in order to find your benchmark, you need several metrics, right?
So the benchmarks are considered as an external data point. So we don't provide the benchmarks, and you have to provide the benchmarks to the system.
Yes, but after that, how do you know whether, like, how much the relevance score or something like that when you do algorithm?
So the algorithm is a basic optimization algorithm that creates a cost function that will be either the effective tax rate or the cash tax or the consumption on of your tax losses. And it will iterate on choosing the margin level in the possible benchmarks, rerun the entire computation, and do it enough time so that you find a solution that is better than the one that you had chosen manually. It is not an AI algorithm, it is what we call a genetic algorithm, because it does that step by step by eliminating the solutions that are less optimal than the group of others. I don't know if that answered your question.
Another quick question.
Go ahead.
Do you apply any weightings for each, like score or something like that?
There does not need to be any weight, because in this case it's not an AI algorithm. It's really a simple optimization algorithm that is more deterministic than what you can do with an LLM. Any other questions? Okay, perfect. One important point is that it may be difficult to identify the data sources to run this computation, but you need to understand that as soon as you have a group of entities that interact in a coherent manner with each other, and that you are able to perform this type of TP adjustments, for example, a bunch of limited risk distributors, this would allow you to figure out the best way for these distributors to interact with their principals in order to minimize the tax burden. And so you don't need to run it over the entire perimeter of the group. Okay. One quick note, if there are some academics, researchers, or even people from the tax administrations in the audience, all of our algorithms are shared in open source, because we actually believe that the representation of tax systems should be first performed by the tax administrations and shared to the taxpayers. But second, we think that it's a public good. So everything that we code with regard to the algorithms is available on GitLab and is also available with the documentation on a wiki. Okay. I'm gonna go to the next section of the presentation. So the next section is gonna be about Pillar 2. What we've heard in the first Pillar 2 conference, and we have also seen today, is that Pillar 2 is a very complex computational process. You need to start with a lot of data points, either about the legal scope or financial data from the entities at different level of segmentation. And you need to end up with a format that is not usable by normal lawyers or normal tax experts, which is an XML. So the question is, how do we go from these data points to the XML? And I'm gonna try to show to you how we do that in our organization. So the first step that you have to take in the Pillar 2 computation is analyze the legal scope, because this will tell you whether or not you have independent subgroups for which you need to gather independent data sets. And depending on the way that you organize, you will have to collect the data or run your safe harbor computation with a minimal set of data. Once you have that, it will tell you for which subgroups or which entities or which jurisdictions you need to gather the detailed information and then perform the top-up tax computation. And then you have another set of rules that apply to identify which of the entities in your group will have to pay. The problem with this model rules is that if you have a group that is very simply organized with a 100% ownership, direct or indirect by the UPE, the computation is far simpler than if you're not in this case. We have groups that work with us that have more than 4,000 entities, like I said, with shareholding structures that can loop, and we have consolidation subgroups that don't have details data per entity. And so one of the major issues is how do you disentangle all of the, how do you organize all of this, and how do you gather all of this information? The other element that is a bit complicated with Pillar 2 is the target format, the globe information return. I don't know if some people in the audience are familiar with it, but the globe information is supposed to be handed out as an XML. This slide presents in a very structured way what it looks like. So basically, you need to have the general information, the legal scope, whether or not you fall under the safe harbor, and then you need to provide the jurisdiction section, and in the jurisdiction section you need to go into more and more details if you're not covered by some of the safe harbor. You can spare a lot of the data collection if you if you fall under the safe harbor, or if you don't fall under the safe harbor and don't have any top-up tax to pay. Then you can keep your aggregates at jurisdiction level. And at the end, you need to perform all of the charging mechanisms. I don't know if a lot of you have ever opened an XML file, but here is the XSD, and you can see again the structure I just presented. You can see here the filing info, the general section, the summary, which is just a synthesis of what comes after, and here you have the jurisdiction section. And in order to understand how it works, it's not that complicated. You just need to open progressively the pluses signs that you see here to see what you need to see. And so in the jurisdiction section, there is a type that corresponds, and in each jurisdiction section, you need to have these elements and so on. So it's really built like, I don't know, we call that Russian dolls in France. I don't know if it applies in English too, but it's a Russian doll system where you need to have more and more data, the finer the elements that you're looking at. Let me go back to the demonstration now. So basically, the way that we have set up our Pillar 2 solution is to allow you to extract as many information as possible from your ERP system directly. Again, the way that we work is that we are not really a solution built for tax consultancies or tax advisors. We are really building solutions to be directly embedded within M&Es in order to automate this process as an internal process. And so basically, once we have gathered the data, the purpose is for your various users to find a synthetic sheet where you have all of the parameter that is gathered, and you can run the computation and reconstruct everything. I am not showing all of the columns, but of course you can treat all of the information that is necessary to treat your scope. and you can identify whether or not your entity is part of the globe scope. You can identify whether your entity is a POPI or not, if it's excluded or not. You can recompute the direct or indirect ownership interest by the UPE, and you can assess whether or not it's in a specific perimeter and whether there is some top-up tax that has been generated. At the end, if you go into detail on the Pillar 2 calculation, you will see the step-by-step analysis that is necessary to be performed, and you can see here that we have solved the safe harbor across the different subgroups that you may have, and you will have the ability to see whether or not an entity is covered or not. And if a subgroup is not covered, you can go into detail and see all of the adjustments that are possible. With the groups that we work with, we have access to their detailed accounting structure, so there is one more drill down that is possible here, and that points directly to their accounting, to their accounts, and so you can see the values that originate from their consolidation. Of course, Pillar 2 is not as simple as that, and so if you have entities that are not included in your consolidation tool, you have the ability to send to them additional questionnaire forms, and so that's what we've done also in this simple example. It's here, it's in the past, not an old example, but you can see here that we have sent different tasks to collect different data. The financial information, we have requested the data, sorry, this one. The financial data, we have requested the data for each entity, and we have pre-filled it automatically, and then the users to which the task has been affected can modify it if they want to. And what is very interesting is that for the scope, we have created an example where most of the data has been gathered automatically from, in this case, an Excel file that we imported, of course, but that can be gathered from a legal management tool if you have one. And on the other side, we also have sent 2 tasks for 2 distinct entities because these entities were not in the legal management tool. And so it's really important to have this ability to destructure, dephase this data collection, because you may have a big part of your perimeter that is not covered by your current consolidation tool or ERP system, and you can ask additional information for the right people. So that's it for the presentation of the Pillar 2 solution. I'm gonna move to the next section about risk management, but the purpose is not to present our risk management tool. It's really to talk about the added value of GenAI in this context. So as a bit of information, we have a tool that allows our clients to gather information on their tax risks, on their tax audits and their tax procedures. So the basic process that you can implement with our solution is to ask the different tax managers, accountants to declare the tax risks. For example, I've done something wrong with my VAT in 2019 in this jurisdiction, and then update yearly the tax provisioning and the risk assessment that you have according, for example, to IFA 23. And so that's the type of methodology that we put in place for our clients. And if you have a tax audit that happens that covers this area, this tax or this fiscal year, then you will be able to gather this information and use it for the tax audit. If you are the manager or the CFO or any person who wants to have a global picture, it allows you to access a dashboard where you can see everything about the tax provisioning of your group at group level and drill down per jurisdictions and so on. So it's very interesting, and it allows to see how the provisioning varied from one year to the other, or how the risk assessment varied from one year to the other. And so the clients that we work with, they use it on a semestrial basis to finalize their accounting and their provisioning level each semester by updating the tax risk that they have. So the main issue that our clients have is that they ask for a lot of added information, qualitative information. They ask questions, or they also sometimes ask to add documents, attach documents to the tax risk, which makes sense if you want to have a memo or a computation sheet. or maybe information coming from one of the lawyers that you have that has written an extensive document about this specific tax risk. Well, you can add it and it will provide documentation. The main issue is that it's impossible sometimes for the central tax team to use these documents. The simple use case we have is that some of our clients, like Renault, they have presence in Asia, like in Korea, and they are not fluent in this language. So sometimes they need to extract information from Korean into English or French in order to use these documents. Of course, these two languages are an example. It can be the case in any other language that is not mastered or used by the administrative team. And so in this case, what we are able to do is use the generative AI functionalities that we know how to use at Algonomia in order to help with these use cases. And so what can we do with Gen AI? Well, what you all know is that it works for the synthesis of documents. It works for the translation of documents. Of course, it's not 100% precise, like it was said in yesterday's webinar about Gen AI. However, it's better than having no information, and it allows to give you context in order to talk to your local team. You also have the ability to classify the information and verify that you have in mind what it is about and maybe have segmented the information the right way. And finally, you can also extract information from the document and put it in a specific format that you want to use. And we are actually working on publishing papers on the use of generative AI to extract tax information from tax documents. And so what are the use cases that you can serve? I'm going to skip the most complex graph, but the simple use case that you can have is to write a timeline of the evolution of the risk that you want to study by the Gen AI. It has access to the entire database, the evolution of the risk, the value of all of the elements that you've collected across the time. And by using generative AI, you can generate this timeline and make it more usable. There are other use cases. You can also ask to score them, to ask them to criticize or judge the quality of the tax provisioning, to verify that the method has been followed, to assess whether or not it has been updated correctly or not. And so basically any question that you want to ask in a systematic manner to all of the documents or risks that you have collected, you can formulate it into a prompt and insert it in your tool, and it will give you as a result additional information that you can use in a structured manner. So it's not something that is just the result of a prompt, but you will have the answer in a structured manner. So now let me go to the example page. So here I'm opening, I'm in French, I'm going to switch to English. That's the language bias. So basically here I'm in the risk management tool. And in the risk management tool, as I explained, you have the ability to select the template of risk that you want to work on. And so in this case, you can see that at the opening I had, 1 billion of tax risk. Maybe it's exaggerated, again, it's fake data. And on the end of the year, you had some changes. The people in the tax team didn't do such a thorough work because there are 88 millions that have not been justified. And you don't know exactly what are the changes, whether there were interest, penalty, and principals. And you can also see, for example, if you want to aggregate by type of taxes, you can also ask to see the aggregation with regard to the type of taxes that are involved. So basically, our tool allows you to analyze the level of risk that you have in the group. And so what we have added is the ability to ask these questions to the risk. And so here you can see the additional fields that we have added to ask additional questions. And so for example here, we have asked questions like, what do we do next? Is it complete? What is the evolution of the risk? And you can see the timeline that has been set. Of course, these are examples. If you had actually qualitative data. Unlike this simple example, you would be able to create a lot more value. And these are functionalities that are directly incorporated in our tool at no additional cost. It means all of our clients that have subscribed to our risk management tool directly have access to this. And it's not a functionality that is available to each base users. It's something that is set up at administrator level in order to have a coherent approach to the automated analysis of the risks. Do you have maybe some questions about what I'm showing?
Yes. Sorry, how did you identify the risks? Do we type them in ourselves, or was there an algorithm?
So that's a very good question. Our solution proposes two ways of identifying risks. There is the spontaneous reporting. So a lot of our clients are using this strategy. They just require the people in their local team to declare any latent or any declared risks within the organization in the solution. But it can be a bit heavy to do that. But other clients have set up automated risk detection strategies, either based on the data that we gather directly from their solution, and so we create tests, or they have created specific risk assessment questionnaires in each jurisdiction to verify the level of conformity. And the last element that you can use to detect risks is to have set up, and that will be our next example, a tax due dates calendar. And if you fall short of the deadlines, if you are late, we can also generate a tax risk automatically. So there are several ways to do it. And most of the time, once they have been generated, you want to monitor them yearly because, well, at some point they will be extinguished, but at first you will have to update them yearly. And some of them require to update a large portion of each risk sheet. And some other clients just ask, is there anything to declare? This risk note, and so move on. So there is a lot of leeway in the configuration. Other questions? Perfect. Don't hesitate to contact us if you want a deeper demo. The purpose was to showcase the technological bit behind it. But if you're interested, don't contact us or come talk to us at our booth. The last example I wanted to talk about is calendar automation. So the way we have designed our solution, as I explained, is to be connected with the workflow manager. Again, like we said, the tax team had to perform a lot of actions, whether it's producing a TP documentation, to produce some specific filings, either they are group level or they are at entity level. And so this is a lot of work that needs to be set up in a timeline. And you can use our solution to set up this timeline. And one of the big use cases that we have worked on is identifying automatically what due dates applies to what entity depending on their characteristics. The revenue, the level of intra-group sales, and so on. The legal characteristics of the entity. And so in order to perform that, our first intuition was to try and get the data from the usual data broker that exists. So you know it's the IBFD, you know Bloomberg Tax. We have also had access to the data from Deloitte Intela. These are amazing databases in order to get information. However, the way they are structured is very hard to be ingested by automation because they are mostly written as text. And so here you have an example. Again, it's a simple example, a bit caricatural maybe. So you have a piece of text that describes how to assess what is the due date for a specific obligation, but it's hard to automate that. And on the other side, you have what an algorithm would want to have as information in order to be able to solve whether or not an entity is in the scope of the obligation or not. And so you can see that it's phrased a bit differently. The language, of course, is a lot easier to read for a human, but for a robot or a program, you need to have specific sets of fields, you need to have constant variables, you need to have coherence between the jurisdictions and so on. And so the work that we have performed in the past years is to build a way to represent these tax due dates in a way that is automation ready. In order to fill this data structure, however, we are not 1,000 people able to do that for each jurisdiction. So our skill is, of course, programming. So we have built a generative AI model that fills progressively this database using first some public information and synthesis, most notably the TP country files that have been provided by the OECD. It's an amazing resource if you know about it. I recommend you check it out. However, what we are doing right now is identifying the primary sources. For example, in France, it would be the BOFI, and pointing directly to it so that our GenAI algorithm can identify the right source of information, treat it, extract the values for each component of the data structure of this structured database, and then fill the database. Of course, once it's done, it's important to have human review. And so the way that we have built this database is not as an internal thing that we keep for us inside and then that we sell. No, we have built it as a collaborative tool that is completely free and open source, and any tax specialist who wants to have access to this resource, because there is a direct link to the primary source of information, of course, any tax specialist can come and contribute to this database, and if they want, be part of this project of having an international repository of tax due dates that is usable for automation. So now I'm going to move into the demo section to showcase to you first this database. It's always under evolution. We are going to publish the contribution part for which you're going to be able to participate either this week or next week. We're going to publish it, of course. And I'm going to also show to you how we apply it in our solution to automate the tasks that are supposed to be performed by the tax specialists in the organization. Let me open a new tab. So this is something that you can already access yourself. It's opentaxcalendar.com. It's something that is completely free and open source. You just need to connect with your LinkedIn account. The reason why we require a LinkedIn account connection is because, well, if people are able to contribute, we want people to contribute in good faith, and by identifying them professionally, we can be sure that they're not going to put weird information, because otherwise everybody's going to see that they put weird information, and for a tax specialist it's not positive. But it's also an incentive for everybody to contribute, because we're not appropriating the work that you've done. You will be cited as the person who has provided the right information. And so in any case, it's good for everybody to participate. And so here I'm going to click on dashboard, and you can see here a word map of completion level of the database that we have. It's brand new, so not everything is present right now. And you have for each jurisdiction a sheet that presents the different obligations that we have and the sources that we have used to fill it. So we have accessed some of the public documents that were available, most notably some of the Big Four public files that they proposed. They are very interesting. But the best source that we have found is the OECD transfer pricing country profile that we use. Among the obligations that we manage, we mostly focus, because it's a bit of our bias.
Excuse me, you need to adjust the Moroccan card. It's not full. Morocco is not complete. Yeah. This is not Morocco. You need to adjust it.
Thank you. Okay. So let's go back. You have here the list of obligations that we treat. And so the idea is that we are going to maybe expand it in the future. Our purpose would be to maybe move on to CIT and VAT, but we do not have the internal competences at Algonomia to work on that. And so if any law firm or if any organization wants to contribute and help us do that, we would be more than happy to make this a worldwide database that covers most of the tax due dates. And so then now let's focus on the table here. In the table, you have all of the obligations that we cover, and it's structured in a way that is usable by algorithms. You can see the type of fields that we can mobilize and the way that we can use it. The most important component, when you click on one, will be these fields, where you have the definition of the deadlines, the thresholds, and the penalties. Sometimes they're not correct, of course, because it's Gen AI, but we're working currently, when we implement in production with some clients, with law firms, to verify the quality of this data. It's easier to verify data that has been pre-filled and with the right source, rather than having to redo everything inside. And so once you have gathered this data, as I explained, what you want to do is automate your calendar. So the example that we have set, sorry, some here too. So the example that we have set, we have programmed it in our application, it is the CTC Leaf. And so in this application, what you can do is gather information from, so here we had configured the automation of the transfer prices too, and within the local files there were some information that correspond to the financial characteristics of the entity. So we have taken some of these and we have input them in the application CTC Leaf. And again, you remember this button, launch algorithm, and it will allow you to study these data points that you have gathered for each jurisdiction and verify whether or not there will be a tax obligation that will apply depending on the characteristics of the entities. And so in this case, it's of course fake data. You gather the information, you launch the process creation. I want to show it thoroughly. So for example, at the beginning, there is no TP documentation that was available because it was not yet required to be available. And once you launch the CTC algorithm, it will automatically create, for the right moment with the right due dates, the tasks to be performed by the persons in your parameter. So here I launch the algorithm. It will take the information from the calendar, confront it to the financial information gathered in these entities. And I will need to reload, sadly. And so what it does, it's gonna create the right tasks in the right parameters. So now I go in the documentation application. You can see that now I will have all of the TP documentation files that have been generated. If I go in the timeline, they will be also present depending on their due dates in the timeline according to what has been registered in the calendar. And if I take Brazil 1, for example, I will have the task to be performed as well as the beginning of the task and the due date that applies. And if I click on the task here, I will see exactly the validation sequence that needs to be fulfilled with the final due date that is applicable for this entity. And if I click on the task, well, the task will not be do something on your own on your side. It will really be generate your TP documentation according to the values that we gathered for your TP generation. And so here, these are the data that have been gathered from the ERP system that have been loaded, and I can click on generate the TP doc, and I actually generate the TP doc according to the calendar based on the data that have been gathered. And you can export it either on Word, on PDF, and so on. Do you have some questions on the use case maybe that I presented? Yes?
How do you extract data and how granular is data? Is it line by line or is it invoice by invoice?
So it's a very good question. We were able to extract the data depending on the way that your security team allows to do so. Most of the time we will receive flat files from the team that manage the IT finance, but if they allow us, we have the ability to connect through API and gather the data automatically. In terms of granularity, this is arbitrary, it really depends on your group structure. There is no constraints.
Okay, so what if the general ledger is not the same in all businesses?
Then we will have to configure independent treatment processes for each independent ledgers, or having a mapping in order to unify the data structures. Are there other questions? If no, I'm gonna move on and conclude this presentation very fast. So what you have seen has been done with AI, but it has not been done with AI in a random way. At Algonomia, we really believe that first, artificial intelligence is scary for a lot of professionals in a lot of sectors, but we believe that we can develop it in a way that is actually non-scary, and this way, we believe, is open source. Open source means that you have access to the code. It means you can reproduce it yourself on your own or with a third-party developer. It means that you are independent and that it can always be tested by external providers. Again, this is an insurance that what we do is clear and auditable. And finally, the way that it's very important, the reason why it's important to do open source is because it gives back power to the users instead of keeping the power to the provider. I know it's weird to say that as the provider, but from our perspective, the main danger here is to fall dependent to other nations that may be less friendly with regard to the use of IP, or the way they bill, or the way they want to gather and have access to the group's data. And our clients are mostly European, and we want to protect the data as much as possible. So every time that we do AI, it's located on servers that are theirs, or that we manage for them, and there is no information that leaks out of it. Another thing that is important is that the result of the AI that we propose belongs to the person who uses it, and if we produce data based on public information, they are now available to the broader public. They are open source too, it's open data. And that is also very important from our standpoint for taxpayers and tax advisors. It means that there is no paywall in accessing what AI can propose in terms of added value with regard to tax information. And finally, the reason I want to talk about that is we have built an NGO to host all of our open source developments. And so basically you can become a contributor, you can become a partner, you can use it, you can contribute to the data that we provide, or you can even democratically participate to the decisions that are being made in this NGO. Because we believe, again, that this is something that should be managed, even if it was possible at IFA level, so that there is no ownership of the tax information by a private party. And this is where I'm going to conclude my presentation. Thank you.